And I would love to explore that further.
Having somebody who can kind of guide you through the very beginnings of the process, give you some insight into it.
What you're doing and tapping into that virtual space is brilliant.
We're happy to work with anybody and give them the tools and diagnostics that they need.
Hey everybody, welcome to Climbing the Corporate Ladder Without Breaking a Heel. I'm your host, Dr. Cynthia Bentzen-Mercer. I am so delighted to introduce you to today's guest. Lauren, aka L2 Howard, is a passionate mental health advocate and the founder of LB Health, a neuroaffirming mental health clinic dedicated to creating safe, accessible mental health solutions and care for every identity. With over a decade of experience in clinical operations and digital health strategy, Lauren empowers others to prioritize their mental well-being. We could all use more of that. Through her work, she aims to foster open conversations about mental health and create accessible resources for those in need. This is truly a topic that is personal and near and dear to my heart. So, Lauren, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Now, I know that your story is also deeply personal, how you launched into this space. And I just think it's such an important part of who you are and what shaped you. So talk to us a little bit about your background and what led you here.
Yeah, so there's like 12 different places we can start there, but I'll go all the way back and then come a little bit further. Or a little bit forward. My dad was a psychiatrist. He was running his own practice basically when I got out of college. He was an incredible physician, but the world's worst business person and should not have been allowed to run his own business. And I think, speaking of kind of generational or learned trauma, watching him really struggle in business made me really good at business because I was like, I'm going to not do that. I'm going to do whatever is the opposite of what he's doing. And so when I got out of college, I did the things that you were supposed to do. I went and got the 9-to-5, the kind of entry level, low paying job that I actually really liked for a little while. And then I started to kind of rail against the guardrails going, I feel like I'm in a cage. It occurred to me that, at 22 years old, there was never going to be another time in my life where I could just jump ship and figure it out and not have any responsibilities. And so I kind of forcefully took over my dad's practice. I had no idea what I was doing. But it did start me on a career in mental health administration that was not part of the plan with my journalism degree at all. But it put me in a situation where I had to figure things out, and I did. Eventually transitioned. My dad passed away, and we closed down the practice, which at that point was a multi-site operation and had turned into a really large footprint. And I went to a job that seemed like the best job in the world. I had just had a baby. They let me work from home. This was before that was super common. And for the first several years, it really was exceptional. It was a great place to work. They took such good care of us. It was always family first. But sometimes cultures change, especially as companies grow, especially as you stop being, 5 people in a room and you start being 50 people where you have to have rules and regulations. And not that I have any problem with either of those, but it did change the culture a lot. And it got far less hospitable, but not in direct ways. So if I said, I need to leave, my kid's sick, it was always, oh, absolutely, no problem. But if it was like, hey, can someone tell me what's going on? Because for some reason, this project plan keeps changing and no one knows why. And it's not what we talked about. And we're sitting in meetings for 3 hours and then we're executing something totally different. And they would say, that's not happening.
Oh. Denial.
Right? I was like, it's not, because I'm like I'm looking at my notes.
Right.
And I'm looking at what we're doing. And none of this is what we talked about. And just, it got more opaque. It got, and I was sitting in this place thinking like, this has to be in my head, right? This isn't, it would be wild for this to actually be happening. Why am I so reactive? Why does this bother me so much? This is not my business. I shouldn't be bothered by this.
Yeah.
and just thinking it was me all the time. There was nothing going on. I was just, I just must be tired. I must be, this is adult life. Being an adult is hard. You're not supposed to love what you do every minute of every day. If it sucks, welcome to the world. And it was always just like, well, this is the job I'm going to retire from, so I should just figure it out.
Wow.
Just going to figure it out. I did not realize how very miserable I was. I don't think I even had the capacity to figure that out. It's just the world was in shades of gray and nothing ever got better. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize it could get better.
Right.
That was the other thing. I just thought that was what it was.
Yeah.
And then one day this insidious little thought crept into my head, like, what if? What if it doesn't have to be like this? Like, what if this is... And it was no, until one day somebody just said something that was like the glass broke and it was, oh, okay, yes, we're done. We can't do this anymore. And I physically could not do it anymore. And so I quit my job very unceremoniously, which is not like me, and sat around going, oh my God, what am I going to do? But I had all of this very pent up everything, and had to get it out somehow. So I just started writing about it, thinking that people were going to be like fully mortified that I was sharing such personal stuff on the internet.
Right.
And instead, the feedback that I got was, by and large, wait, that happened to you? Because the same thing happened to me, and I thought it was just me.
So suddenly I'm crazy because I think all these things are happening, but they're in complete denial. They're saying, oh, no, it's all made up in your head. Now you're getting all this validation of, that gaslighting situation.
Literally thousands of people. That's not an exaggeration.
Wow.
Like my inbox almost immediately lit up. And I was in a place where like there's no repercussions for me for saying these things out loud, but these are people who are existing in these jobs currently.
Right.
And so a lot of them couldn't say anything publicly. The ones who could had gotten out. And I was like, wait a minute, if this is me and it's you and it's my entire inbox, mm-hmm. Maybe it's not just me. Maybe we're just not talking about it.
Yeah.
Maybe we've been told that we should just be grateful for having jobs and shut up.
Right.
Maybe we have all internalized that women aren't supposed to be at work anyway. So you have a job and you should feel grateful for it.
Be grateful. Be happy you have it, right? Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't feel some sort of gratefulness for having a paycheck.
Sure.
But you're not, like, that paycheck isn't charity. You're doing a job.
That's exactly right.
There's a transaction that's happening there. It's a transactional thing. So you can both be grateful for the fact that you have an income and expect to not be abused. Like, those two things can exist together.
Yes. Yeah, I saw your recent posting about that. A paycheck is not a permission slip to create a toxic environment or to treat you poorly.
Right. It's not, psychological safety is not a fringe benefit.
Right.
It's not something that you get just because you've hit the executive level. Like, you should be psychologically safe every time you walk into your workplace, regardless where it is. And that's not the case in a lot of places. And so we started having those conversations and having them very openly. And people were both very grateful and very terrified of it. Not terrified that we were having them, but definitely terrified that somebody was going to find out.
Sure.
Especially if they were in that environment. And then the conversations turned into like, what if I can't leave? How do I stay in a job that's eating my soul if I can't leave? Because that's a real situation. This idea that no job is worth your mental health, that's true, but is like not being able to pay your bills worth your mental health? Because it's the same problem. It's just moved.
Right.
It's just different stress. And so it turned into talking about like, how do you exist in that environment? Because if I had been better able to take back my control and ownership of my own faculties and not given them so much control over and not having the emotional reaction to things that I didn't need to have an emotional reaction to, even though I'm glad everything happened the way it did because I wouldn't have ended up where I am. I didn't, like, I was getting paid the same whether they were wasting their money or not.
Yeah, understood. Yeah. So, I mean, is it fair to say, Lauren, that you're not advocating that necessarily that people that are in these unhealthy environments just, pick up stakes and walk out the door necessarily.
No.
Rather, it worked out for you, which is great.
Learn from my mistake. Yeah.
And there's the woman listening or the person listening who says, and you alluded to this, that's not an option for me, right? I'm a single mom, or I only have my income is all I'm reliant upon, etc. But coping mechanisms and naming it and learning how to deal with it really became the solution element of what the work that you do.
Yeah, I mean, I think the solution is getting out of your shitty job. Like,
right.
Right. But there are mitigating things that you can do in the meantime that buy you time, so that it's not this burn it all down, walk away. It's better to be in financial ruin than it is to be in a job that's abusive. You shouldn't have to choose.
Yes.
Like,
exactly.
that shouldn't be a situation that you're put in, but that's the reality of a lot of the world. And so that's where we're at.
Yeah.
We have groups specifically on, like, I'm in this terrible situation. How do I deal with it? I have, my boss is terrible. I hate going to work every day, but I need to pay my bills and I have to find a way to sustain. And this is something we hear a lot, which is valid. While working in this soul-sucking job, I do not have the bandwidth to go find another job. What do I do? Mm-hmm. And the real answer is you take your soul out of it. Right. Don't give them a soul to suck.
Right. Right. Yeah. And intentionality. I mean, I think that's where my work and your work intersects, right? It's this, you have to take back an element of time that you are protective of to invest in you. Even if it's, I talk about the 7-minute pivot, even if it's 7 minutes a day is all you can afford, but it's what one tiny thing you're choosing that you're going to do to pivot out of. Could be updating your resume. It could be updating your LinkedIn page, but doing something, even if it's a small thing over time, but taking that agency back. You have an interesting perspective on burnout and that what burnout really is, and it's not really the job. Say more about that, because I suspect there is a person listening that is feeling very burnt out right now, and it'd be very interesting to unpack what's really underneath that.
Yeah, I think so. We know what the clinical definition of burnout is. It is in the ICD-11 code set, which means that globally it's actually a diagnosis that you can make. It's not in the code set that we use in the US. So you have to, if you're looking for treatment, you kind of have to treat it as a different disorder because we don't treat it as part of our code set. But the reality is that we talk to a lot of people who have experienced burnout, are currently going through burnout, have never been able to get out of burnout after identifying that was what was happening, et cetera, et cetera. And when you really get down to what they're saying, they almost never complain about the work. I almost never hear somebody say, I was working 80 hours a week, doing active labor that entire time, and the physical work I was doing was crushing me. Mm-hmm. What they say is, I was putting in too many hours, and the corporate environment around those hours was completely untenable, or is completely untenable. Mm-hmm. It is almost never the job. It is the mental gymnastics that come around doing the job. Yeah. It is the back channeling to make sure that you can actually do what you need to do. It's this idea of managing up because your manager is not actually capable of doing the job that they're in. And so you have to manage around them or through them, which is additional work and additional emotional labor that you're doing. It's the time that you spend from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. worrying about the job, anxious about it, concerned about it, unsure of what's going to happen next.
Sure.
That is not active work, but you're still working. That means you're literally working from the minute you get up to the minute you go to sleep, because when you're not working your job, you're thinking about your job. And do people have too much put on them? Yeah, but they're usually people can look at what is an inhumane amount of work and say, I physically cannot complete that in the number of hours we have in a day. I can only do so much. And even if so much is still too much, they like at some point they're going to fall asleep. You can only do so much. What people struggle with, and for really good reasons, is this much more insidious aspect of workplaces, which is the things that people aren't saying, or the concerns about how things are perceived, or the pushback that you get when you ask for like humane conditions and wildly inappropriate things like that. It is almost never the work. It is almost always the mental gymnastics around doing the work.
Right. And I would add to that, I'd be interested in your perspective. I would add to that sometimes it even more disguises itself as work. And I'll give you an example. Coaching a woman who works ridiculous hours, right? She has young kids, and because she has not had boundaries in the past, everything that they pile on, she does, and she gets it done with excellence, whether it takes her till 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock, whatever it is. So she's not putting boundaries around that. And so what does the organization do? They keep layering on because they can, right? Yeah. And so she's perpetuating this. So it does feel like the work, and to a degree it is. Part of the frustration is this feeling of being taken advantage of, right? Because I'm working all these hours, I'm working around the clock, and yet you aren't setting appropriate boundaries around to say, look, I can take that additional thing on. I'm working on these 3 things. Which of these 3 things can come off so that I can take that thing on, right? Having some ownership and agency and boundaries around it as well. How does that play into the whole mix of things too, where we're almost perpetuating our own burnout?
It's very much part of the conversation, especially with women, because so many of us are so historically bad at setting boundaries, but we also don't look at things for the reality. We have to do 10 times as much work to get 10% of the recognition that the mediocre dude next to us gets just by existing. And so we're so used to working so much harder to get where we're going that we don't realize that we are perpetuating this idea that you're going to work harder regardless. And I say this to a lot of people. The reward for doing good work is not more money, it's more work.
100%.
And
yes,
they're not going to turn around and say, man, you did such a great job on this that you're going to get to do the same amount of work and we're going to pay you more because we like you so much. They're going to say, hey, you did this so quickly. That tells me that you can do 10 times more than this. And we're going to give you the 10 times more. But this person beside you who either isn't capable of working at that level or who knows better isn't doing that. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't do exceptional work. But it does mean that you don't give away the important parts of your life, the things that you no longer get to participate in, because for the hope of something they're not even offering.
Right.
And if they're offering it and they're offering it for real, they'll put it in writing. So somebody saying to you, man, I see you on the management track, and I really think that if you put in good work for the next year that we'll be able to promote you. And you think, man, I better work 80 hours a week so that when I get there in a year, if they meant it, they would put it in writing. If it meant anything.
And ask for it in writing.
Exactly. Is there a leadership mentor program that I can go into that after a year I become... Can we set something like that up? Can we have quarterly check-ins? Can I get ask for something concrete? Because a couple things can happen. One, the boss who loved you and thought that you hung the moon could be gone at any minute. And that happens to people all the time. And the boss who follows the guy who thinks you hung the moon is never that guy. But also, sometimes it's just used as a carrot when the real reward is the stick.
Right.
And so we struggle tremendously with boundaries because we have been conditioned to believe that we have to work harder to prove that we belong to be there. And then we get burned out when we do all the things that we were told we had to do, and there's no reward there. The only reward is more work. And then if you do get the promotion, they're giving you the promotion because of the sheer amount of things that you can manage, which means you're walking into more.
Right.
It's not getting easier.
Yeah, you're just signing up to take on more. So what's the answer? For the woman listening that is in this cycle, what advice do you offer to help stop this constant cycle of burnout?
I think you have to stop and figure out what your non-negotiables are. That doesn't mean that you only work 9 to 5 every single day. You clock out at 5 regardless. You never show up after hours, whatever. If you have a job that can facilitate that, more power to you. Do that. I support you. But not every job is like that. But it means that if one of your non-negotiables is that I'm out at 4 p.m. every Tuesday because my kid has a baseball game and I'm not missing it, and I don't care what else you need from me, but I am done at 4 p.m. on Tuesdays, that's your non-negotiable.
Right.
Now, you know what the flexibility is there. So because I have my non-negotiables, these are the things I can flex on, and I'm happy to flex on. I'm not coming in early because I have to drop my kids off at school, and that's more important. Or not more important, but that's a responsibility I have that I have to do. I'm not coming in early. And so knowing what your non-negotiables are is very important. Communicating them, reinforcing them, and not letting guilt let you flex on them.
Bingo.
There are other things that you can flex on, but not for guilt's purpose, because as long as you're doing what's in your employment agreement, there is nothing to feel guilty about.
Right.
And then figuring out where the balance is. I say this to people all the time, but the only people who take issue with your boundaries are the people who benefited from you not having them.
Yes. Yes.
So people in your workplace who are being unreasonable about you drawing a line in the sand and saying, this is a non-negotiable for me. And you recognizing that, or you communicating that there are other ways that I can try to make this work, but it's not going to be this.
Yes.
If they take issue with that and it's not something that you are contractually obligated to you or to do, that's just got to be okay.
I've seen a couple of really good examples recently. I've actually employed one of them myself. One is I was working with a branding, copyright branding gal, and in her signature block, she has something about her working hours. I'm available to you Monday through Thursday, 8 to 4, and Fridays 8 to noon. If you catch me outside of those times, I will get back to you, at the beginning of my next business day. And it was so interesting to me because I grew up in an era where I worked whatever hours it took and missed all the things. And, I'm a very poor example. My history is a very poor example of what to do in this day and age. Yeah. And I saw that, and at first I thought, wow, that's really bold. Like, if I wanted her at 5 o'clock to help me with something, I guess she's not available. And so I admittedly, I'm not proud of myself, but admittedly I thought, that's odd. And I'm not sure I feel about that as a client. And then went, this is exactly what I encourage people to do. And the other thing is I've put in my signature block that, everybody has different working hours that work best for their schedule. If you're receiving this at a time that is not convenient for you, please don't feel the need to respond until a time that is. This is the time that's convenient for me. I'm paraphrasing, but I send a lot of things very early in the morning or on weekends or evenings because I work odd hours sometimes. But I never want people to think, oh my goodness, I received that at 4:30 a.m. somehow I'm expecting a response, at 5 a.m. So I do think that there's some important things. I want to switch gears. There's so much I want to get to. And I love the concept. I love the concept of burnout and the concept of it related to it's generally not the job, it's the bigger environment. I think that's super important. And I think that there's not a person listening that, if not now, has at some point or will have in the future that feeling. But you lean in a lot to imposter syndrome. And I want to get to neurodivergence and some of those things before we run out of time. But let's talk about imposter syndrome and the work that you do in that space and how that has shown up in both the clinical and non-clinical spaces in which you're navigating.
I mean, it's like the devil that's on my shoulder all the time, constantly whispering in my ear. I mean, I am a person who knows a lot about clinical things just by osmosis and exposure and building these programs, but I'm not a clinician. I don't practice. I can't practice. Anytime that I'm run one of our groups, which are non-clinical, I always have to say I'm not a therapist. I don't want to go to jail in the 50 states where we offer services. So I have to be very clear that these are non-clinical services. These are groups. These are coaching. It's different. And so that does lead to a lot of feelings of like, maybe this space maybe I'm not supposed to be here. Maybe I'm not allowed to do this. And the reality is that the only person who's ever said that to me was me. And if I tried to count on one hand the number of people who have specifically said that to me. And so as I was kind of, for years when I was job searching and when I was trying to figure out what I was going to do after my dad's practice closed, I tried so hard to bury the fact that it was my dad's practice, because that would just make it seem like I didn't earn the job. I don't have any background. I don't know what I'm doing. I was skating on my dad's coattails, blah, blah, blah. And like, don't get me wrong, there was some coattail skating happening. Like, he was the most credentialed doctor in the state. He'd been practicing for 55 years. Everybody knew him. There was access that came from that proximity. But when I started, we had 6 patients. And when we closed, we had multiple sites, and he had made money for the first time in his entire career. And he had a nest egg. And we actually had to stop taking new patients because I just couldn't hire clinicians fast enough to take them, which I thought was never going to happen. And none of that happened because my dad, who was inept at business, figured out how to do all of it. None of that happened because my dad, who is terrible at marketing, figured out how to do all of it. Right. And so, but I was terrified that somebody was just going to say to me like, oh, so you ran your dad's practice? Congratulations.
Right.
And I didn't know what that feeling was, but it just followed me everywhere. I finally got a new job. And every time something wasn't perfect, I was like, oh God, they're going to find out. They're going to find out. They're going to think that they hired this brilliant person, and they're going to find out that I'm just a bump on a log. They're going to find out. And then when I finally left that job and realized that I was holding so much shame around things that I had actually done. Like, it doesn't matter how you got there. Did you do the things? Right. Did I open a multi-site practice? Did I get insurance contracts that didn't exist before I was there? Did we open a giant consulting wing that didn't exist before I was there? All of that was true. And so it eventually brought me to this thing where I started asking this actually of other people who would say this to me. And it was just a very simple question where they would say, like, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this. And I'd say, who told you that? And they would go, well, no one told me that, but I'm sure they're thinking it. Did they tell you that they're thinking that? Well, no, but so you don't actually know that it's happening. Well, no, but they have to be thinking it, right? What somebody thinks about you is not your business. It's got nothing to do with you. If they're not nice enough, if they're not close enough to you or in community enough with you that they will say the thing to you, then it doesn't matter. Their opinion is irrelevant. You can't tell yourself no because of something that you don't even know is happening. And the other thing I realized very early on in this, at least, journey was that nobody's thinking about you.
Right.
We spend a lot of time convinced that if you do something, somebody else is going to give any care at all.
Right.
Nobody has time for that. And if they do, if they actually have time to spend any amount of brain power on what you're doing that doesn't affect them, they got bigger problems than you.
So true. We can spend so much mental energy, exhausting mental energy around things that we're projecting. We are just stewing over. I use a framework: pause, protest, pivot, pray. Pause the negative thought, protest it, which is what you've done. Are there facts to this? Is there evidence to this? Is there anything that would substantiate this other than me thinking this? And then pivot to something entirely new and different and positive. And then, whatever pray means to you in your tradition, but put it out into the universe and let it go. Because it's interesting too, I work with a lot of multi-generation businesses. So family owned and operated businesses that are in, third, fourth, fifth generation of transition. And that is a reoccurring theme that you experienced, is that, here you were following in your father's shoes, this amazing man who had these incredible credentials, very well known. And so there's this, will anyone ever assume that I did anything on my own merit? And I find that with my clients who are in these multi-generation families is, well, I don't want people to think I just got the job because my mom or dad. And it's like, well, there is an element of truth to that, number one. So number two, let's talk about, how do you create your own legacy, right? How do you create your own path? And then have a highlight reel, which is what you did. It's when you go back through all of the things that you actually brought to fruition, not your dad. That's your highlight reel. And suddenly you're like, maybe yes. And I did get my foot in the door, but all these other things that have happened are on my own merit, which is amazing.
Well, and the question that I ask in those situations is, if you went somewhere else with the things that you learned from this special access that you got, would you be able to do those things still? And if the answer is yes, the answer is yes.
Right. Yeah.
Do you have to be under that umbrella to be successful? Or could you go to, your family makes shoelaces. Could you go to another shoelace factory and make shoelaces for them? Yes. Okay.
Transferable.
Then you had access, but you didn't have, you weren't born with the capacity to make shoelaces.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so much of our mental health lingers in those spaces of burnout, not feeling enough, burning the candle at both ends, questioning ourselves, doubting ourselves, etc. You also do a lot of work, and this is so important to me. I did my dissertation around mental health. I have family members with, ranging from depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. I mean, I don't know anyone in this day and age that isn't an arm's length away from something in this space, and specifically in the realm of neurodivergence and different, not broken. This seems to be on the uprise in terms of awareness. And so what I'm curious about, are more people getting diagnosed later in life? It feels like I'm hearing more and more about adults who are just learning ADD or, autism spectrum disorder, or some diagnoses that are coming so much later in life. And they're finally having these aha moments like, that explains my entire life. So how does that show up in the work that you're doing?
I mean, it shows up in a huge way. We didn't actually start focused on neurodivergence or autism spectrum disorder. We started focused on burnout, toxic work environments, and workplace trauma, and quickly found out that you could not extricate the two. People would come to us burned out because they were going to work and doing their job 40 hours a week. And while simultaneously doing that job, doing an additional job of quote unquote acting normal for that same 40 hours, which is exhausting. So they were working 80 hours in 40. They were doing twice the work of everybody else, if not more than that, just to get that 40 hours of work done. And the more we talked about burnout, the more people came to us and said, like, can you help us find testing for autism spectrum disorder? Because that's what this feels like, or I'm starting to learn more. And I think, and the answer really at the time was like, no, there's no tools for this, or there's very few. It's very hard to find for adults. And after maybe the 10th person came to us in a very short period of time, we were like, all right, we got to figure out how to do this. And we onboarded this incredible academic team that helped us build out the program, which has since evolved and has now evolved into a much more complex system of testing that is really great and really, really informative for the individual. But I think, one of the things to really keep in mind is autism is not something, or ADHD also is not something that you get as an adult. It's something that you had as a child and you needed support for then. Mm-hmm. And the kind of millennials and above, we, unless we were so completely unable to integrate with society at all, they just didn't pay attention to it. They didn't know what to look for. Now, our diagnostic criteria also has changed. In 2013, it changed to give a much broader definition of autism spectrum disorder and to take away some of the kind of more fringe diagnoses that would have been more common then. And so that has changed too. But the diagnosis as we know it now would not necessarily have been available to us as children, even though something would have. Are we seeing more people coming for diagnosis at this point? Absolutely. But we are also seeing a lot of people who would have been really excited to do it last year who will not get near it this year. That's probably our biggest challenge.
Say more about that.
There's a lot of talk from our federal government, for lack of a better term, about that's just genuine misinformation about autism and how they want to approach it and how they want to eradicate it. And there's been talks of labor camps and registries and all sorts of things that I will say, as a Jewish person, I am really, really offended by. Right. But a lot of people are scared. And so, we've had to make accommodations within our practice to do things that I never in a million years thought I would have to do. Sometimes we have to undercode because we don't want to send off autism codes. Sometimes we don't release records. If somebody requests records, even if they have a signed release from the patient, I'm not giving them to them. The patient can send them. That can be their choice, but they're not getting them from us. We have a kill button on our records because if someone wants to show up to my door and try to pull our records are cloud-based, but and demand a full, account of our patients, which would be illegal, but they still think they can do it. There's a kill button on our records, and there's my husband and family actually have a list of instructions from my attorney in the event that I get hauled off to jail for destroying medical records. But I'm not going to give them that information.
Right.
I'm just not.
So it's reached a point where having the diagnosis on record, for some people is creating concern.
And I know what we'll do with it. I don't know what anybody else will do with it.
Sure. For the person listening that says they've seen friends or loved ones who've had a later diagnosis, right? And I hear you. What I hear you saying is, if you have autism spectrum disorder, you had it as a child, you were probably very high functioning, and therefore it was, overlooked. Maybe you were just different and you masked that differences as a child. And then, of course, into adulthood, we continue to figure out how we mask as though we're more neurotypical. What would be the signs of somebody who says, I've always felt different and I would love to explore that further? I guess a double-barreled question, but what might be some of the things that would be signals, right? And then what is the path to, through your organization or others, to ultimately go through the assessment process?
Yeah. So this idea of feeling different, it varies. It varies widely from person to person. And I will say that the thing we hear most from our patients who do come to us for assessments, and this is the thing that we hear by and large literally every day, is that if I get a diagnosis, I can learn to be nicer to myself. I can give myself permission to be nicer to myself. And I say this to anytime it comes up, I say this to everybody it comes up with. You do not need a clinician to give you permission to be nicer to yourself. You don't need a diagnosis. You are perfect as you are, and you are entitled to softness and kindness and support even from yourself. So nothing that a clinician is going to say to you should give you permission to treat yourself the way you deserve to be treated. But that said, there is this sense that I've always been a square peg in a round hole. I make friends or I make acquaintances, but they die out over time because either I'm too intense or I'm not intense enough, and I don't know how to follow up, and I don't know how to read social cues. In women and femmes specifically, women tend to be socialized to be quiet and demure and fit into the pack. Women are very, very pack oriented. We get into groups of friends. We try to act like our friends so they'll think we're normal. And then as a result, hide their interests, the things that they want to work on or the things they want to be part of because they don't want anybody else to think they're weird. Mm-hmm. But what that also leads to is when we talk about this idea of sensory overwhelm or what we're now calling sensory assaults, which is basically like my nervous system is so dysregulated that I am going to have a meltdown. In general, boys just have the meltdown, whether it's in public, around their family, whomever, they just have the meltdown because they anticipate that they will be forgiven for it. Somebody will be like, this is atypical behavior for a boy. Something must be wrong. We must intervene. And they'll get, something will, they'll either be allowed to write it out or somebody will intervene or they'll get support or whatever. For the most part, especially young boys, they just have the meltdown.
Right.
Girls and women and femmes, I should say, don't. By and large, what they do is they experience the same stimuli, they feel the same things, and they keep it quiet and to themselves because having an episode in public that people are going to talk about would be absolutely mortifying. They could never live through that. That would ruin their social, their social interactions. Nobody would understand. And so they leave, they hold it in and hold it in and hold it in, leave and have that same meltdown or that same sensory overload privately. They get angry, they scream, they cry, they break things. It's the same thing.
Right.
But they bottle it up until they're in a safe place to do it. And so when you think about the two different presentations, we think, well, this must happen more often in men because we see it more often in men.
Yeah.
But the reality is girls and people who are socialized to be proper and likable and worry more about the pack around them accepting them, they just learn to hide it.
Right.
And they do it by themselves, or they do it in front of one trusted family member or a handful of trusted family members. And that's how you get this gigantic kind of disparity between understanding these symptoms in people who present as male versus people who present as women or non-binary.
Yes.
Or femmes, because we're just socialized differently. And so once you start looking at those things, because if you ask most women, especially women who've been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder or suspect it, if they have ever had a public meltdown, 9 times out of 10, they will say, absolutely not. never, I would die. But if you say, okay, but have you ever left a place and not been able to function when you left because you were so overwhelmed by what you just experienced? Oh yeah, that happens once a week.
Oh goodness. And so how does that then manifest from a perspective around isolation? Because does that then perpetuate more of the isolation that oftentimes people feel? Do you feel that, have you seen that show up more in women, those identify as women, et cetera?
I think a lot of those individuals tend to, and it depends. There are some people who are truly isolated and they just don't feel comfortable around other people because it's so much work. And as women get older, they tend to try less to build friendships because doing that work to hide themselves is so much. So there is an aspect of isolation there, but then there's also this idea of like isolation despite. So like I'm at work every day surrounded by 50 people, all of whom talk to me, all of whom think I'm a nice person. None of them actually know a dang thing about me. They all think I'm a totally different person than I am, and I can't be myself. So I am surrounded by 50 people and yet still completely isolated.
Oh, yeah. Which I think is worse, honestly. It's just a matter of opinion, obviously, but I think sometimes lonely or isolated in a crowd feels worse than lonely or isolated when you're alone. Again, I could go on and ask you thousands of questions around this. For the person who's listening that maybe is struggling with some of this, maybe is struggling with, I feel like I'm different. I feel like I don't quite fit in. I feel like I have to wear a mask every day. And so it's 80 hours of work, right? Between the work I'm doing and the work I'm trying to present myself. Your organization offers both clinical and non-clinical opportunities and interventions and education, et cetera. Talk a little bit. I'd love the person listening to hear what are some of the resources available through LB Health and the work that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have assessments for adult autism and adult ADHD that are available throughout most of the United States. They are covered by most commercial insurance. We also accept Medicare. We have some Medicaid plans, but it varies widely by state. And we also have self-pay options. The self-pay options are faster just because we don't have to go through the insurance verification process, but also the self-pay options are designed to be accessible. We did not want to create something that perpetuated what was already out there, which is you have to wait 10 months and it costs $3,000. Right. And so there are clinical solutions if you want something from a provider. We say this a lot. Not everybody needs a diagnosis. Self-diagnosis is valid. If you don't need validation from a provider, if you don't need documentation for some purpose, if you don't need accommodations at work or something similar, you can skip it. For those people who don't need that, but who are looking for support, we have psychoeducational groups that are led by community members who it's peer support, talking through, just very typical things that people who either suspect they're neurodivergent or who have a diagnosis of neurodivergence. We also have sensory education classes where we can teach with some really incredible OTs why your brain processes stimuli different and how you can work through those things. The outcomes from those are great, and they're also non-clinical. Our groups are always $20. They're designed to be hyper accessible so that anybody can attend them. Or most people can attend them. And then there's also, I'm sure there's resources in your community. I can't guarantee that your community has an autism clinic that you can go to that does adult autism testing that is also covered by insurance, but you might have a therapist that you can start with to just say, I think this is what, I think this is what is happening, a therapist, a psychologist, a nurse practitioner, even your family practice doctor, or your general practice doctor, just to say, I think this is what is happening. What are my next steps? Sometimes they know, sometimes they don't,
Right.
but having somebody who can kind of guide you through the very beginnings of the process, give you some insight into it, help you set up what our next steps, we're always happy to do that. But most of our patients come in with, we have the therapy, we have the psychiatric care as well, but most of our patients come in with that already established, and they're looking for somebody to basically support their home care team. And that's fine too. We're happy to work with anybody and give them the tools and diagnostics that they need.
Well, you've said so many important things, and I love what you do and what you stand for and what you're building. It is so under supported throughout, at least the United States, for sure. There's so much more need than there are providers available, and what you're doing and tapping into that virtual space is brilliant. And I'm personally so grateful. I wanna hone in on one thing you said that really was provocative and struck me, and it's the loved one in my life that is dealing with this. Am I or am I not neurodivergent? You said to be nicer to myself. I just want to know so I can be nicer to myself. And your answer was, you don't need a diagnosis to be nicer to yourself. You can give yourself grace and love yourself regardless of the differences that you bring. And I've seen in real life, in real action, that there's sort of this, it would just help me understand why I'm so different, why I think differently, why relationships are harder, why interaction is different. If I just had a label for it, and then I would be able to say, oh, well, that makes sense. It's because of this, and then address it. But what's so powerful and important about what you said is, for some people, that's going to be appropriate and necessary, but it shouldn't be the reason and the only thing that allows you to give yourself, grace and love and all of that. So thank you for saying that.
I will leave you with something that my dad used to say that really sticks with me in these populations. So we didn't deal a lot with autism spectrum disorder. It was a little bit of a different time when we ran his practice, but we did see a lot of patients who had obsessive compulsive disorder. And they tended to be the patients who came in with the greatest amount of shame. For whatever reason, it really weighed on them that they had these brains that didn't permit them to do the things that they felt that they should be able to do because they had to compulsively do these other things. And they would come in and kind of say that and just basically say, like, why is my brain broken? And my dad used to say to them, as their clinician all the time, without people like you, we would still be living in caves. We need people who are precise and who do things the same every time and who focus on things that other people don't see. We need those people because somebody like me doesn't care, and I just deal with my cave.
Right.
I'm good with my cave. People like you make progress that the rest of us are too lazy to do. And you used to just see this like weight come off of their body going, oh, you mean like, and he would say, obviously, if this is troublesome, if it's getting in the way of things, yeah, we have tools we can use for that. We will use those tools for that. But that's not, we don't have to.
Right.
If we don't have to treat symptoms that are actually serving you in some way. Now, often they're not serving them, but that doesn't mean that we're going to try to get rid of all of them. We're going to try to get rid of the ones that make you uncomfortable. We're going to try to address them through therapy or medication or whatever tools we have in our toolbox, sensory education on our end. But we're not looking at your brain and going, oh, that's broken and it's got to be fixed.
Right.
We're going, oh, no, that's special. We need that, we need somebody like you who's going to become the engineer who is never going to let something be 0.1% off. Because that's how we come up with new innovations. That's how we keep people safe. That's how we build bigger buildings. That's how we do all of it.
That's right.
That's
right.
And
that's
it used
the
to
air
just
traffic control I want.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Exactly.
The person creating
I need
medication.
the person who's not going to be like, it's really fine that you're taking off 3 minutes late
Yeah.
and into that's probably fine. No,
It's
you don't want
close.
that. We need those people.
Exactly. And I love the tagline different not broken. I mean it's so beautifully captivates exactly what your dad stood on and the foundation of his beliefs and his mission. Give us your .coms and your socials as we wrap up here so folks know how to get a hold of you.
Run my mouth on LinkedIn on the pretty regular, so you can find me at linkedin.com/in/L2, ELLETWO. You can find information about our assessment programs at latedx.com, LATED as in dog, X as in X-ray.com. We're on a bunch of socials, but I don't know all of them off the top of my head because I have an amazing team who handles them, but you can find us. We have regular groups. We have assessments available almost immediately, everything through our Late DX program.
And we will drop all of that in the show notes so that people know how to reach out to you. I am so confident that your late father would be so proud of the work that you're doing and how you are continuing to take his legacy forward and really be there for those who are so often marginalized and on the edges of society, and to your earlier point, so necessary as part of this human condition. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for being there for people that need you most. Well, that concludes this episode of Climbing the Corporate Ladder Without Breaking a Heel with your coach, Dr. Cynthia. Congratulations on taking time to invest in yourself. I realize how precious your time is, and I feel very privileged that you took a little bit of it to spend with me. If you liked what you heard and it resonated today, I invite you to follow, like, and drop a comment on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And be sure and share with a friend or loved one that you think needs to hear this message. Until next time, remember to boldly invest in your future today.